Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project, conscious conversations, empowered parenting with me, Susan Dolci. It's time to open our hearts and our minds to what it means to be a parent, exploring and expanding the ways we communicate, validate, and show up daily for our kids. With a parent-centric focus, you learn to become more present, a better active listener, more reflective, more engaged, and mutually empowered. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. The Awakened Parent Project starts now. Hey, everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm your host, Susan Dolci. I'm a certified parent coach with the Jai Institute for Parenting, and it's my hope that you will find this a safe space to journey on a path of both practical and spiritual self-exploration. From the time my first daughter was born in 1994, I've been driven by a vision where children are nurtured both physically and spiritually by adults who are present, grounded, and empowered. I believe that conscious communication, self-exploration, and self-forgiveness are the tools that enable parents to foster deep, lasting connections with their children. Parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence, honesty, self-compassion, unconditional love, and conscious communication. And today's topic is one that many parents, I believe, are struggling with, and that's not only the appropriate amount of screen time for our teens, but the general impact of social media use on teens today. I am welcoming back to the show Richard Capriola to help us unpack this, what I would call, very murky topic. He recently retired from the Menninger Clinic, and he has been a mental health and substance abuse counselor for over 2 decades. He has treated adolescents and adults diagnosed with substance abuse issues, and he is the author of The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, which is available on Amazon. You can also get it on your Kindle, I think. Can you get it on Kindle?
Yes, it's available on Kindle.
And his website is www.helptheaddictedchild.com. Welcome back to the show, Richard.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about this topic that, as you noted, is very concerning to a lot of parents when we look at how much time and what social apps our kids are using. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about this topic.
Well, thank you. I've got adult children, so I'm kind of on the other side of this, but I remember when back in, I think it was like 2008. So my oldest daughter was 14. She was a freshman in high school and she wanted a Facebook account. And I was kind of like, isn't that for like older people? Isn't that for like college kids or whatever? Isn't that why it was developed? And I remember there was like, an age range of or an age limit of 13. And I was like, okay, well, I suppose you're in high school now, I will experiment with this. And I remember my biggest concern being my concern about her being potentially stalked by pedophiles, like being groomed through Facebook in that way. And it never even occurred to me all the myriad of issues now, like cyberbullying and all of that. Yeah. So with that, what are the social media platforms that are popular today and how many teens are using them?
Well, there's a number of social apps out there. It seems like there's one being developed every day out there, but some of the more popular ones are Instagram, which is owned by Facebook and attracts around 22 million teenagers. Facebook is not really all that used by teenagers. Roughly about 5 million teens are using Facebook, but the one that sort of rises to the top of the list is TikTok. That is, it's more popular than Instagram. It's heavily used by teenagers. Over 600 million people worldwide are using TikTok. I have a granddaughter that uses TikTok. So for TikTok, I would put at the top of the list as the most popular application that teenagers are using today.
Mm-hmm. I totally understand the Facebook thing, because even my kids will tell me, my 20-something-year-old children will say, that's for only the old people use Facebook anymore. And actually, I really, to be completely transparent, I stopped promoting my business on Facebook, and primarily focused on Instagram just because that's where the young audience is, like the
Right.
people having children or young adults.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, why did TikTok rise in popularity the way it did? Do you know?
I think it's an application that allows teenagers to create their own world, so to speak. It's video, it's audio. Um, my granddaughter, for example, gets into what's called cosplay, which is
Mhm.
costume playing, where they dress up in costumes and sing songs and do things like that. And and that's very appealing to a lot of teenagers. Other people like it because of the ability to post information, to post jokes, to goof around and make silly comments. And it's a combination between, I think, the visual part of it and the audio and the music, which all comes together to create a very creative, interesting environment for teenagers.
Do you think um, because it really, I feel like, and maybe it's just me with my limited knowledge, it really rose to popularity during the pandemic.
Yes, I think a lot of social media use increased due to the pandemic when kids were isolated at home. They were no longer attending classes or engaging with their peers on a personal one-on-one basis or in groups, and they weren't participating in extracurricular activities such as sports. They were pretty well isolated at home, and their primary communication with their peers was through either social media apps or their phones or text messages. I think that isolating environment created a large increase in teenagers turning to these applications. So I think you're absolutely right there.
I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the syndrome, the TikTok Tourette syndrome, but
Yeah.
I'm curious also if you've seen, like, I know it was on YouTube, like the like stupid challenges, right? That these teens would do, like they would
Yeah.
have like marshmallow eating challenges or just whatever goofy, jumping skateboard silly challenges. But do you think that um, I guess personally, I'm very curious about these TikTok challenges and how those have impacted kids. I
Well,
mean, some are fun. Some are dance challenges, like dance with your mom,
yeah.
but some of them,
Some of them can be very creative. Some of them, as you noted, can be entertaining, and they can actually be, fun, and I guess kids find them very attractive, but they can also become more concerning when they involve activities that could potentially be harmful. They may seem like they're funny, they may seem like they're gimmicks, but potentially they could be harmful. Maybe they're stunts, maybe they're challenges, things like that. You have to be very careful about what you're looking on these applications and how they're affecting kids and what they're actually promoting kids to do.
so how does one do that? I mean, is it just? I mean, really, like if I had a teenager today, I think I would feel um, that I needed to be on a high
Yeah.
level of readiness and watching and overseeing, which I didn't feel like that kind of a parent. I know a lot of parents use that. I know I'm digressing a bit, but like that 360 app, so they know
Hmm.
what their children are doing 360 24/7, all like where what they're doing and where they are all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I wouldn't even know where to begin to like monitor that in my children.
Well, I think that's a feeling that many parents have. Where do I begin? What do I do? How do I responsibly, take charge of this situation? And it's a fine line, for many parents to walk. I can tell you some of the recommendations that Mayo Clinic has made in this area. And the first one is to set reasonable limits. Talk about how to avoid social media interfering with activities such as sleep time, such as meals, and such as homework.
Mhm.
Encourage a bedtime and sleep routine, and keep cell phones and tablets out of teens' bedrooms.
Mhm. One of
Another
my
one,
very best friends she has 7 children, but her
yeah,
three youngest, who are 14 and between 15 and 13, she takes their phones and their tablets every night before they go to bed.
yes, yes. And my mother's, my children's uh, mother does the same thing. She shuts them all off and actually takes possession of them, has them
Mhm.
starting at 9 o'clock at night. So, that's one example of a limit that you can place on your child's use of these cell phones and applications. Another recommendation was to monitor your teens' accounts.
Mm,
Let teens know that you're going to regularly check in on their accounts and make sure that you follow through on that. Check into
mhm.
the applications that they're using and what they're doing.
I'm taking
Um,
notes.
uh, Another recommendation is explain what's not okay.
Hmm,
Discourage things like gossiping and spreading rumors and bullying or damaging someone's reputation. Talk to your child about how that's not acceptable. That's not something you will tolerate. And
mhm,
talk about what is appropriate and what is safe on social media so that they know what's not permitted and what is permitted. Also, encourage face to face contact with their friends,
mm,
especially for teens that are vulnerable to social anxiety. So, encourage your children to have face to face activities with their friends, not be so consumed with, social interaction through the media. Encourage them to be with their friends, to talk with their friends face to face. Um, Another one is to talk to your talk to your children about social media. Talk about their habits. Ask how your teen is going to use social media and how does it make them feel.
mhm,
And I think it's also important to remind your children that social media is full of a lot of unrealistic images,
mm,
that many times what they're seeing and what they're hearing on social media is not true. It's not
right.
accurate. And don't just assume that what you're seeing is real, because many times it's not. And we'll talk a little bit about the Facebook research here, but it's very important that teens understand, that some of the stuff that they're seeing is made up. It's not real. And then finally, use the parental controls, the parent controls that are available to you. And if you don't know what those are, you can check with your internet provider, and learn about what those parental controls are. When our grandchildren come to visit, for example, my wife will get on her phone and through the internet and will shut down their access to the internet at a certain time during the night, whether it's 10
Mhm.
o'clock or midnight or whatever it is. So just know that as a parent, you do have access to those controls where you can monitor and take control of the hours and the days and the times when your child can be on the internet. So if you don't know what those controls are, check with your internet provider and learn about what type of controls you have access to that will allow you to not only monitor but set limits on the time and the days when your child can be using social media apps.
Yeah, another friend of mine there's actually a device that she has their computers hooked up to. I forget what it's called. Looks like a cube. It might even be called a cube. And the one drawback to that, well, her one son got irate and smashed it. But besides that, is that it caused her to also have to monitor her time. Like
Yeah.
she was like, I can't say, I mean, granted, you're a child and I'm an adult, but it was like at this time of the night, everything's going off. We have, so it really made her take responsibility and be an example.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and the other thing I would say is learn about these apps. For example, do you know what the app's used for? Do some research and look into things like TikTok and Instagram and learn a little bit about, what those applications are and how people are using them. Ask your child, how do you plan to use this application? What are your goals? What do you want to use this for? Why do you want it? And then, what sort of things do you plan to post?
Mhm.
What are you going to be posting? What are your interests? What do you want to post on here? So those are some discussions that you can have with your child before they start using the apps, or maybe just check in with them every once in a while to see how things are going.
We're going to take a quick break. There's still so much to cover. This is quite a bit to unpack, but it's super important, I think, especially now, um, when mental illness and anxiety and depression is on the rise with teenagers. So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Awakened Parent Project. I'm Susan Dolci, and today I'm joined by Richard Capriola, who is a mental health and substance abuse counselor for particularly teens. And we are talking about social media and social media use for our teens. What's good, what's not so good. We have a lot to unpack. And before the break, we were talking, Richard was going over several recommendations by the Mayo Clinic. And so which were all fabulous recommendations, by the way. Like, I'm sure every parent uh, is curious as to where do I even start with this, because I think it can be very daunting and overwhelming. But what age do you recommend that children be exposed to social media? I think 13, which is pretty much the limit, or the minimum for children, is like, that to me is ridiculous. They're like 13, they're babies. And they're babies with budding hormones. Like, I just don't understand why, like, I don't get it. I would please enlighten me. What do you think?
Well, that's a question I think every parent struggles with. What age is appropriate? What age should I allow my child to start using some of these apps? And every child is different. Every situation is different. You know your child as a parent better than anyone. You know how responsible or irresponsible they've been. You know their history. But many of the cyber experts recommend that the minimum age for getting onto Facebook is around age 13, 14. For things like Snapchat, they are more concerned about kids being too young, and they recommend for things like Snapchat a minimum age of 16. So somewhere between 13 and 16, depending on the application, depending on your child's maturity level, and how responsible they've been in the past. I think a parent needs to make that judgment for themselves. But I would be very hesitant at letting any child younger than age 13 get on these applications.
So uh, I hope I'm not throwing you a curveball here, but what came to my mind when we were talking about the recommendations is, there's a I believe that there is like a dopamine hit
Yeah.
when these kids get on. And that's why, I mean, like, you can be addicted to scrolling. You can be sometimes I even find myself that, like, I'm either bored or I like want connection. I'm seeking connection. So I'm going through, trying to find my relatives and what they've posted, and is there any science behind that? Can kids get addicted to the dopamine hits that is caused by this?
Well, you bring up two very interesting topics. The first is kids pay attention to what their parents are doing. So if you as a parent are addicted to being on your devices, if you're sitting there, during dinner or during the evening hours, and you're glued to your iPhone, whether you're texting or reading news or on a social app, kids pay attention to that. And they see
Mhm.
that you're being consumed by your time. In fact, you're spending most of your time, glued to an app, and then you sort of question, well, why are they spending so much time? But they're paying attention to what you're doing too. So you have the responsibility to model that behavior to them, whether it's, how long you're on apps and during what times you're on apps.
Mhm.
Um, so kids they're very much paying attention to what you're doing.
Yeah, now I do it because none of my children are home and I miss them. So,
And
so I'm
the
like,
other
what are my
question,
children up to?
the other question that you brought up was, are these applications addictive?
Mhm.
And it's interesting because one of the findings of the Facebook research that was done was that teenagers know that these applications are addictive. They know it. Uh, and what they've said is they have a desire to spend less time on the applications, but they also say that they don't have enough self-control to change their behavior, to change their scrolling behavior. So the teenagers, interestingly enough, are very perceptive. They understand and know that these applications have become addictive for themselves, that they're spending too much time on them, and they have a desire to pull back the amount of time, but they can't do it. And that's classic addictive behavior. Um, and there is this rush, as you pointed out, of dopamine in the brain, which is a pleasure chemical. We feel pleasure because we have dopamine neurotransmitter in our brain, which causes us to feel pleasure. And kids get this dopamine rush when they're on these applications, or even when they get a text message that comes through and makes its little text sound. So there's a lot of characteristics to addictive behaviors that we can find in social media applications.
So interestingly, when you mentioned that, I got um, when I was on Facebook, when I was on the old people app, um, uh, I they asked me to conduct a survey, and so the one of the first questions was, what's the parent company name of Facebook? And I was because I'm old, I was a few generations back, and I said Alphabet, and then there's like, well, it's Meta. So then, and then they went through like asking me if I feel that my life is better or worse, like different sorts of scenarios, is
Yeah.
better or worse because of using Facebook. Do I feel it's harmed me in any way? Am I neutral? Am I, it's the always somewhat, neutral, whatever. And it was like, it probably took me about 15 minutes to go through it, just, you know, to really give those questions some thought, like, how is it really impacting my life? Now, granted, I'm not a teenager, but I'm interested that they offered the survey, one, and two, that they offered it on Facebook, which, like I said, I keep calling it the old people app, but we know that that most teenagers and young adults don't go on Facebook. Um, they will cross post. They'll go to Instagram and they'll cross post to Facebook so their old relatives can see what they're doing. But I didn't see a survey like that on Instagram, where those questions might be better, might be more important to ask the younger set.
Yeah. Well, Facebook did do some research on, how these social apps are affecting teenagers. And I don't know that they wanted it to become all public. It did become public. But some of the findings are interesting, if not alarming. For example, um, 60% of girls and 40% of boys said that they experience negative social comparison, okay, comparing themselves to others. About 37% of girls said that they feel pressured to look perfect in their posts. They feel
Mm.
pressure to look perfect. Again, comparing themselves to others. About a third of the girls say that the content that they're viewing makes them feel worse about themselves. And that's why it's so important that as parents, we let these kids know that what they're seeing on these images are not always accurate. Some of them can be photoshopped and made up. But about a third of girls admitted that what they're seeing on these social apps actually makes them feel worse about themselves.
Yeah.
And 50% of users reported feeling unattractive, who say that they feel unattractive, said that the feelings began on Instagram. So 50%
Mm.
of them who said that they felt unattractive said it came from what they're seeing on Instagram. And 14% of boys, 14% of boys said Instagram makes them feel worse about themselves. So, this is important information for parents to be aware of. And for teens who already are struggling with some type of mental health issue, social media may actually make those feelings, more worse, or intensify them. You mentioned earlier about the mental health issue among our teenagers. That has been a crisis that's been going on for 10 years prior to the pandemic. And then the pandemic came along and sort of ignited it.
Mhm.
But we've had a crisis in teenage mental health for a long, long time. The pandemic affected teenage mental health, it affected adult mental health. Um, but these social applications, we need to be careful with them, and we need to talk to our kids and to our teenagers about how their use of social media is making them feel, because so many are reporting that it doesn't make them feel very good about themselves. Um, so, have those conversations with your kids. Check in with them from time to time. See how they're doing. Um, on my book's website, I have a blog article about how the pandemic affected teenage mental health, and there's a series of 10 very very quick questions that you can ask your child to check in on their mental health. Very simple questions. For example, one of them is, if your feelings were weather, what kind of a day would it be outside? And you can make some of these for younger kids, interesting and fun. But it's important to check in with how are our kids doing in the mental health area from time to time. And if they're on these social apps, just recognize that this research is showing that for some kids, these applications are not making them feel very good about themselves.
Yeah, and gosh, and to be a parent who maybe struggles themselves with talking about their feelings
Yeah,
and not being knowing how to express it or share, to even get to a place where they're comfortable reaching out to their child, um, because it's just not how they were raised. Like
yeah,
I could countless times that my kids have said, how come these people don't know how to talk about their feelings? I'm like, they weren't raised that way. And
right.
so yeah, yeah.
And
Ugh.
we're almost built to not talk about our feelings, to not share our feelings. And if you're a parent and you grew up in an environment where, that wasn't encouraged, and you didn't have very many experiences, positive experiences in sharing feelings, yeah, that's going to be a real challenge for you to step up and talk about your own feelings and encourage your child to talk about their feelings. But it is so important because teenagers, especially teenage girls, tend to keep everything inside. Boys tend
Mm.
to exhibit it in behavior that's not appropriate many times, but girls tend to keep things inside. So it's very important that we try as best we can as parents to check in with our kids on their mental health, and talk to them about it, and set an example by, as difficult as it can be, talking about our own feelings. And it can be very simple. It can be things like, well, when I heard this, this is how I felt. Or, you know when I see you doing things like such and such, this is how I feel. Set set an example as best you can.
Yeah, it's great advice. We're gonna take another break. When we come back, I want to talk about TikTok Tourette's, which is
Okay.
fascinating to me. It's fascinating phenomena. But we'll be right back in a little bit. You're listening to the Awakened Parent Project. Hey, everybody. We are back talking about teens and social media use. I'm joined by Richard Capriola, who has, for over a decade, treated adolescents and adults diagnosed with substance abuse issues. But today we are talking about social media and maybe like social media abuse because it can become addictive, which we've already said. But before we hop on to the last portion of this or last half of our time today, where can people find you?
The easiest way is to go to my book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com. Helptheaddictedchild.com. There's some blog articles that I have posted. One blog article is how the pandemic affected teenagers' use of substances. Another one is mental health, and has the 10 questions to check in that I talked about earlier. There's also information for those who are interested in my book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, which is about 100 pages because I know parents are busy, but helps parents get a better understanding of adolescent substance abuse and particularly the warning signs, because so many parents miss the warning signs
Mhm.
of a teenager who's using a substance. So those warning signs are very in the book, along with a number of important resources and other information. And there's a link on the book's website that'll take you to Amazon where the book's available as a Kindle and as a paperback. So the easiest thing to do is go to helptheaddictedchild.com and read the resources that are there. And if you want a copy of The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse, just click on the Amazon and it'll take you directly to Amazon.
The other thing that I loved about your book is that it's also sort of like a Bible for substances.
Yeah.
Like you go through each type of substance, whether it's inhalant or an amphetamine, or you go through you list all of them, because that was always my concern when my kids were younger, was that a new substance was going to, come into being. And I wasn't going to know about it because it's so, it always starts sort of in the dark hidden corners, right? And I wasn't going to know what it was or the nicknames for it. So you do a really good job of outlining all of that so that you it's sort of like a dictionary for substances, and that's hugely helpful.
Well, thank you. Parents know about alcohol and marijuana and some of these
Mhm.
other drugs, but they may not be familiar with some of these other drugs that are out there on the street that kids have access to. So just a very brief understanding and a little bit of knowledge about them, I think helps parents feel hopefully a little bit more confident and more informed about what's out there, because these drugs are out there. They're readily available to kids. When we ask them how easy is it for you to get these drugs, they tell us it's no problem, and
Mhm.
these kids don't think they're very harmful either. So the more information we have as parents, I think knowledge is power, and hopefully we feel a little bit more confident and less afraid about this topic.
Yeah, and just one more laud about your book is that it really, like, if you are struggling with a child who is addicted or has a substance abuse issue, um, written very empathetically. It really makes you feel like you're not alone, like you get it. And yeah, it's a phenomenal book. I think every parent should have it. That's what I said the last time you were on. Like, everybody needs to have this book.
Well, thank you.
Okay, so back to social media. So you actually no, no, posed this question in our prep, and I'd heard about it and I'd read about it, and I kind of thought, well, this just must be some uh, not phase. You probably have a better word for it, but the TikTok Tourette's, like a copycat. That's what I was thinking, like a
Yeah.
copycat sort of syndrome. But I think is there more to it than that? Like, what's going on? First, explain what it is.
Well,
And
TikTok Tourette's is a term that really, I think, came out of the pandemic when professionals began to notice that teenage girls, especially girls, started to mimic some of the behaviors that we see associated with Tourette's, which is characterized by short phrases, same type of phrases, repeating them over and over and over again. Sometimes it's accompanied by jerking or flapping movements. Tourette's, when it's actually diagnosed, affects about 1 out of 160 some kids. But it seems that a lot of this behavior was mimicking behavior. It was mimicking some of the behaviors that we see with children who have legitimately been diagnosed with Tourette's. And it seems that much of this mimicking behavior was seen on social media applications. So again, bringing in the social media applications. So teenagers started to mimic. Some teenagers started to mimic these behaviors that children diagnosed with Tourette's are exhibiting, and it sort of was, okay, uh, sort of this thing on social media where they were mimicking these behaviors, um, and sort of grew to this term of TikTok Tourette's.
Mhm.
It was primarily, I think, on TikTok where they were exhibiting this mimicking behavior.
So, okay, so that was my primary question was, is it mimicking? Or I mean, obviously Tourette's is a nothing to joke about,
Right, right.
for people who experience and live with it, and family members and parents of children with it. So I'm not trying to make light of that in any way, shape, or form, because it is uh, debilitating
Mhm.
for people who have it. But so it's not, because there was, when I was reading the article, I'm like, wait, are you trying to say that this is contagious? Because I don't believe that was the case, but it was just watching. So what you're saying is, watching it repetitively, it's almost like you pick up the habit.
Well, or you enact what you think is funny, some of these
Okay,
behaviors, and you put it
that's
on
not
Tik.
funny.
Right, right. It's not funny. It's very demeaning. It's very hurtful, because this is a very serious condition that affects many families. And to make fun of it or to mimic it on a TikTok video that you think is funny, and then you get positive reinforcement, positive feedback from, your fans out there. It's sort of sad when you stop and think about it. But it was mimicking behavior. I think some parents got concerned about it and took their child in for an evaluation to their physician, and it was discovered, well, this is not really a serious situation of Tourette's. It's mimicking behavior that often accompanies TikTok, but are often accompanies Tourette's. But it
Hmm.
pretty much boiled down to a lot of kids, mimicking these behaviors and putting them on TikTok, and then unfortunately, in some cases, they get positive reinforcement, positive feedback because kids think it's funny.
Yeah, well, that's awful.
Yeah, it is.
That's just
It
awful.
is.
So, if I would also like you to, if you could share some advice on, it's like you gave us the recommendations for Mayo Clinic,
Yeah.
um, but if you have any advice for parents on how to actually begin the conversation about limiting screen time, even so, we're not even talking about social media, just screen time,
Yeah.
which obviously became a necessity during lockdown. I mean, this is how kids, like you said, stayed connected to their friends. This is how they went to school. And so now, to come in and say, okay, well, you know what, honey, now, you're in school in person, and you get to see your friends, and you have your extracurricular activities. How do you start to have that conversation with your child, regardless of their age? Because, like you said, they can get really upset. It's like taking candy from a baby. Like it.
I think first of all, it has to be age appropriate. You'll have different requirements for a child that's 13 or 14 and just starting on social media than you will for, a high school junior or senior. And also every child's different. You know your child better than anyone. You know their maturity level. You know how responsible or irresponsible they tend to be, and all of those factor into decisions that, as a parent, you must make on your child's use of social media. But regardless of all of that, I think it's appropriate to have a conversation with your child about what your expectations are as a parent. What do you find as appropriate and inappropriate use? What do you see as appropriate and inappropriate times for when they're be on social media? Do you discourage use during family gatherings? Do you discourage use during mealtime? Do you discourage use before homework is done? Um, do you discourage use, after a certain hour at night when they should be sleeping? And you have those conversations not in terms of punishing or threatening, but in terms of expressing your concerns about their use. This is a conversation where you're sharing your concerns and what you think is appropriate, and inviting them to give you their impression of it. They may not agree with you and you may not agree with them, but if you have this conversation, which starts from, this is my concern, now you tell me your concern and we'll talk about these things. The more you can talk about these things with your child, the more likely you are to reach a common ground and not get in a position where you have to, come in and take action that the child perceives as punishment. So the
Mhm.
earlier you can have these conversations, open conversations with your child about social media, whether it's the apps that they're on or the time limits or what's appropriate behavior, I think the more you can have these conversations, I think that's productive. And the more often you can check in with your child on how things are going. Sometimes, we'll just sort of let our kids go off into social media, and we don't check in on them from time to time to see how things are going. And they may not want us doing that. They may object to it, but I think as a parent, there are things we can do to keep tabs on what our kids are doing. But certainly start with the conversation of approaching it from a curiosity point of view. Try to learn your child's point of view on this. Don't just share them your point of view, but really listen to what they're saying and what they're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I countless stories of parents whose young children, not even teenagers, who have attempted suicide, not even realizing that they were being cyberbullied
Yeah.
because they just didn't think to ask, and that's the tragic part of it, is that there's if a child is being tormented, um, and they feel that they don't have any resources, like, a teacher isn't going to help, or if I complain, the kid's only going to get meaner. I mean, it's just like regular bullying, but
Yeah.
it's almost worse because they're behind a facade, and they can say and do whatever they want. They feel, impervious to any punishment because you know it's just on the internet.
Yeah, and that's where we get back to the initial early stage conversations that we have with children prior to the use of social media, and the need to check in with them from time to time so that they understand that not everything on social media is accurate. Not everything is something that they can believe in. And if they have any concerns, that they can talk to you about them, and just check in from time to time to see how things are going, because there may be something that they're doing or seeing on social media that's troubling to them, and they may tend to keep it inside. And perhaps you just checking in from time to time to see how things are going. They may tell you everything's great, everything's fine, don't worry about it, um, or they may actually say, something that's really bothering them. But you give them an opportunity at least to talk about it.
Have you ever heard of the term Finsta?
No.
Okay, so Finsta is your fake Instagram,
Okay.
and it's sort of where you put your like you don't post there all the time, but it's sort of like the ludicrous sort of part of your life, or your like the things you don't want, like, because you
Okay.
can it's usually a private account, and you only have like a certain amount of people that are your Finsta followers. But yeah, I didn't know what a Finsta was until my youngest was a senior in high school, and I was like, Finsta, and then she explained it all to me. So that's the other sort of disturbing thing about social media is all of these sort of phantom accounts or fake accounts. And as you said, telling our kids that, so much of this is not real. I mean, all you have to do is get on Instagram, and I'm not good at this at all, but it's got hundreds of filters, right? um, I don't know how to use filters. I actually don't do my own social media. My daughter does it for me. Because what do I know about social media, right? But yeah, it's um, it's fascinating that there's still this component of looking at what somebody posted with two or three filters and touch ups and teeth whiteners and blemish removals and all of that, and just go, oh wow, look at her life or look
Yeah.
at his life, and it's comparativitis is what it is.
Mhm. It's an illusion.
It's an
You know,
illusion.
it's an
Yeah.
illusion that sometimes, mm, because they're kids, they don't understand that, and then they start to compare themselves to it, and that it's all an illusion in many cases. The other issue is, some of these kids will try to make their sites private, and they will be able to determine who has access to seeing them,
Mhm.
um, and maybe that's appropriate. It's hard, maybe it is, but as a parent, you need to let your child know that as far as you're concerned, there are no private, sites for them. That you expect to have access to all of their postings that they have. Um, yeah, because they will tend to try and make them private, and then gather a select group of peers that have access to their sites. And if you're not one of those, you have no idea what's being posted.
Agreed. Agreed. So, Richard, what are your final thoughts? What are your final recommendations for parents if to help them make these decisions and recommendations regarding social media and their teens?
I would say first learn about these social media apps, learn what Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are all about. Go into the apps, be familiar with them so that you know what they're doing. You're a little bit knowledgeable about how they work and what they are. Have conversations with your child about social media apps. Model good social media behaviors, whether you're using your applications for emails or text messages or whatever. Model appropriate behavior, and by that I mean, if you don't expect your child to be texting while you're having family meals, then you shouldn't be doing it either.
Mhm.
um, if you're sitting around at night all the time glued to your iPhone or to your tablet or whatever, they're gonna model that behavior too. So model good, appropriate behavior, and then have conversations with your children about these social apps from time to time. Check in with them, see what's going on, see how they're feeling about it. See if they think that there's anything appropriate that they've seen. Encourage them to share with you, what they're experiencing and what they're seeing, and then just try to stay on top of things as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. Now that you bring that up, it just reminded me of the probably half a dozen times that my girls came to me concerned about what they saw their friends posting and saying, mom, this I'm worried about her. I
Yeah,
think maybe she has an eating disorder, or I think there might be something going on at home. And and to not be afraid
yeah,
to, go. And my youngest daughter did. They went to the school counselor and sort of, dare I say, snitched, but they were that concerned about one of their friends. And it was all just a lot of it was because of what she was posting on social media. So,
yeah.
so we can take care of each other too, not just our own kids, but
That's a very good point, and we should be taking care of each other. And I think that kids are very perceptive. They pick up on things that other kids are doing. So that's a great example of how our kids can use social media to pick up on things and maybe help somebody who's struggling.
yeah. So Richard Capriola, he is the author of oh my gosh, I can't, The Addicted Child. It's like, I know this book. And you can get it on Amazon, or you can go to his website, helptheaddictedchild.com. And you can get it hardcover, you can get it on Kindle. Like I said before, I highly recommend this book for every parent. I know we were talking about social media today, but it's a fabulous book to have as a resource. And thank you again, Richard, for coming back and being on the show and talking to us about social media today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to the program and for participating in our discussion, which I hope was very helpful for a lot of people. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. I hope it was. I hope it was. So remember, everybody, I say this all the time, parenting is not about perfection. It's about communication, presence. But one more thing, I'd like you to consider that maybe parenting is about allowing your children to also be your awakening. Thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for being a part of the Awakened Parent Project. My goal with this show is to help us all become more compassionate and engaged parents by diving into the many techniques and ideologies of the conscious parenting community. This is a safe space to embark on a practical and spiritual journey of self-exploration and expand our ideas about conscious parenting. Got thoughts, questions, ideas? I want to hear from you. Reach out to me if there's a topic you'd like to hear covered on the show, or to share your conscious parenting story by visiting susandolci.com.